The night cracked open with the sound of tires grinding against gravel and headlights flooding the trees like searchlights. I had just tucked my daughter into bed in our family cabin, a place built by my grandfather's hands, when I heard voices outside, low, menacing, and full of arrogance. My stomach turned as I stepped onto the porch and saw them, 3 bulky men in black jackets standing at the gate, their shadows stretching across the dirt road. And standing between them, directing them with the pomp of a general, was HOA Karen, her robe flapping in the cold wind, her face flushed with fury. She jabbed her finger toward the cabin, her shrill voice slicing through the night. "There she is. Get the girl out here now. She's in violation of our curfew ordinance. No child is allowed to stay overnight in this community cabin without HOA approval. Bring her to me." Her words landed like ice in my chest. My daughter, barely 12 years old, had simply been reading on her bed in pajamas, her hair braided from the day's adventures. And here was Karen, summoning muscle to drag her from her own home. I clenched my fists, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. "You're trespassing, Karen," I growled from the porch. "And if you so much as touch that gate, you'll regret it." She sneered, puffing her chest out. "This cabin belongs to the HOA now, and your daughter is under our jurisdiction. Don't you dare lecture me on trespassing when you're the one violating every code we've set." She gestured to the men. "Do it." The thugs moved forward, their boots crunching the gravel, their eyes cold and empty. My neighbors had begun to gather in the shadows, drawn by the noise, but no one dared step in. Fear had kept them quiet too long, Karen's wrath looming over the valley like a storm cloud. I knew I couldn't let that fear win tonight. I stepped down from the porch, my flashlight cutting a beam across their faces. "One more step, and you'll wish you hadn't." My voice was low, steady, and full of the authority that years of training had forged in me. But Karen only laughed, a shrill, cruel sound that echoed off the cabin walls. "What are you going to do? You're outnumbered. These men don't answer to you. They answer to me." She looked smugly toward the neighbors hiding in the dark. "You see, he's powerless. I run this community. I run all of you." I let her revel for a moment longer, then reached into my jacket and pulled out my radio. With a sharp click, I called in the code I had hoped I would never need to use here. Within seconds, a voice crackled back, firm and clear. "Copy that. Sheriff. Units inbound." Karen's smile faltered, her laugh dying in her throat. Her eyes widened as my badge glinted in the flashlight beam. She had known I worked in law enforcement, but she had never believed I was more than a deputy. What she didn't know and what I had kept quiet until now was that I had been sworn in as county sheriff just weeks before. And the county line didn't stop at my cabin gate. The thugs froze, uncertainty flickering in their eyes. They had come expecting an easy job, a paycheck for scaring a family. Now they were realizing they were seconds away from being booked on felony charges. Karen sputtered, You can't bring county business into HOA matters. This is private." But her words cracked, her authority evaporating in the cold night air. The twist came when a figure emerged from the shadows of the road. It was my brother-in-law, a retired Army Ranger who had been staying in a neighboring cabin for the weekend. He stepped into the light, his presence commanding, his voice quiet but lethal. "If those men take another step toward that cabin, they won't just answer to the sheriff. They'll answer to me." The thugs hesitated, glancing at each other, the first traces of doubt visible in their hardened faces. And then the sirens came. Red and blue lights tore through the darkness, bouncing off the trees as patrol cars rolled up the mountain road. Deputies poured out, their flashlights and voices cutting through the chaos. Hands where we can see them. The thugs raised their arms, caught between Karen's screeching commands and the undeniable force of law. Karen shrieked, spittle flying from her mouth. You can't arrest them. They're my security. I ordered this raid legally. But the deputies ignored her, cuffing the men one by one as the crowd of neighbors burst into whispers of relief and awe. I turned to Karen, my voice carrying over the stunned silence. You didn't order a raid. You orchestrated a kidnapping attempt. You threatened my daughter. And you did it all under the false banner of HOA authority. She shook her head violently, her robe slipping from her shoulders, desperation twisting her face. No, you don't understand. I was protecting the neighborhood. Her words cut off as the deputies moved in, reading her rights while she flailed against the cuffs. The queen of fines and fear, dragged away in slippers and shame, her empire of intimidation crumbling before her eyes. The neighbors stepped forward slowly, as though awakening from a long nightmare. One by one, they began to speak, their voices rising. She threatened to tow my truck. She fined me for planting sunflowers. She told my kids they couldn't play outside. The truth spilled out like water over broken stone. And I realized the valley wasn't just watching Karen fall, they were finding their voices again. That night, after the cruisers disappeared down the road, I stood at the gate, my daughter wrapped in my arms. The neighbors gathered close, some still shaken, others smiling for the first time in years. My wife placed her hand on my shoulder, her eyes fierce but proud. You didn't just protect us, she whispered. You gave everyone back their courage. And I knew she was right. Karen hadn't just lost her war against my family. She had lost the chokehold she had on an entire community. The cabin lights burned bright into the night, a beacon of defiance, of resilience, of justice that had finally come home. The trial became the most talked about case the county had seen in years. Reporters swarmed the courthouse steps. Neighbors filled the gallery, and the air inside felt like the thick pause before thunder. Karen shuffled in wearing a wrinkled suit. No longer the towering tyrant of our cul-de-sac, but a defendant whose kingdom had collapsed overnight. Her once loyal board members had cut deals, testifying against her in exchange for leniency. Even the hired thugs, facing felony charges, admitted they'd been paid in cash by Karen herself to remove my daughter from the cabin. The prosecutor laid out the evidence with devastating precision. The 911 call where Karen demanded action against a 12-year-old child. My body cam footage showing her screaming for the men to raid the cabin. Bank records of thousands siphoned from HOA accounts into her personal slush fund. And testimony after testimony from neighbors who had suffered under her fabricated rules fines for bird feeders, threats over garden decorations, harassment for family gatherings. Each word was another nail sealing her coffin. Karen tried to fight back. She rose to her feet during cross-examination, her voice cracking as she shouted, "You don't understand. They needed me. I kept order. Without me, this place will fall into chaos." But her performance only exposed her desperation. The judge, unimpressed, silenced her with the gavel. "Ms. Karen, what you call order, this court calls tyranny. You attempted to abduct a child under the guise of HOA authority. That is not order. That is criminal." Then came the twist that stunned even me. A federal investigator took the stand, revealing that Karen's security thugs weren't a one-time stunt. For months, she had been hiring muscle to intimidate residents into paying bogus fees, creating a shadow operation that bordered on racketeering. What had started as petty harassment had grown into organized crime, and she was at the rotten center of it all. The gallery gasped. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak now looked at one another with vindication in their eyes. The verdict was swift and merciless, guilty on charges of attempted kidnapping, fraud, racketeering, harassment, and misuse of emergency services. The judge sentenced her to prison and ordered restitution for every resident she had extorted. When the deputies let her out in cuffs, her face twisted in disbelief. She spat one last time. "You'll regret this." But her words fell flat in the courtroom echo, drowned out by the sound of neighbors exhaling years of fear. In the weeks that followed, the community transformed. The HOA dissolved, dismantled like the crumbling fortress it had been. In its place rose a neighborhood council built on collaboration instead of intimidation. Families who once cowered indoors now gathered at each other's homes. Children laughed freely in the streets, and the sound of music and conversation replaced the silence of fear. The cabin, once a target of Karen's greed, became a symbol of resilience. A meeting place where neighbors planned barbecues, cleanups, and festivals instead of dreading citations. One evening, as the sun bled orange across the treetops, I stood by the gate Karen had once rattled in fury. My daughter ran across the yard with friends, her laughter bright and unbroken. My wife placed a hand on my shoulder, her eyes steady with pride. "We didn't just protect our family," she said softly. "We set everyone free." And I knew she was right. The power Karen thought she wielded had vanished the moment truth and courage took its place. That night, the neighbors lit lanterns by the lake, their glow floating on the water like stars fallen to earth. One by one, people spoke of what it felt like to breathe again, to live without fear, to laugh without looking over their shoulders. Mr. Allen, the elderly man who had endured her threats for years, raised his voice and said, "We thought silence would keep us safe." But silence only made her stronger. Speaking out saved us. The applause that followed was louder than any gavel. Karen's name became nothing more than a warning, a reminder of what happens when power is left unchecked and fear goes unanswered. The valley that once bowed under her cruelty now thrived in unity, stronger for having endured her reign. And as the lanterns drifted across the lake, I realized her downfall wasn't just her punishment. It was our redemption. So now I turn to you. Was Karen ever truly protecting her neighborhood? Or was she only feeding her own hunger for control? Was her downfall justice served? Or should people who abuse power so cruelly face even harsher consequences? Share your thoughts, because every community will face its own Karen. And the choice between silence and resistance will decide who we really are.